I'm Zim, and you're listening to the Helpful Photographer Podcast in collaboration with New York City Photo Safari. To register for a safari, please visit newyorkcityphotosafari.com. Over the past month, a couple of people have shared images with me with quote-unquote strange dots or streaks of light. Unfortunately, this wasn't evidence of ghosts, but rather lens flare. Flare is the result of a point source light hitting the glass of your lens at certain angles. The result of flare can be highly desired or not at all. Lens flare can increase or decrease depending on the angle of the light, the design of the glass, aperture settings, and also how dirty your lens is. So what does lens flare look like, and what am I talking about specifically? The most desired lens flare is when the light creates an ethereal look and often comes in the form of what looks like halos of light. Sometimes it can really enhance the look of a photo. One of the ways that you can intensify this is by closing down your aperture. Although very often I find that lens flare is actually being added in the post-process and not during the shoot itself. The reason is because lens flare is so difficult to predict. Even if you close down your aperture and are shooting directly into the sun, a 1 millimeter change in the angle can change everything. So if you're not getting that nice halo of light while shooting, just add it in post-process and fake it. Another desired effect of lens flare is when point source lights, like street lights, burst into little stars. You can again intensify this effect by simply closing down your aperture. In my experience, you have to get to at least an f8 or higher, although these days there seems to be diminishing returns once you get much past f11 because you're introducing other problems. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, check out episode 71. So those are the desirable outcomes of lens flare. But what about the undesirable outcomes? One of those outcomes are small solid dots of light, usually white in color, but sometimes yellowish or even green. Very often, this problem can be compounded by a dirty lens. Normally, it's fingerprints on the front element and sometimes a dirty back element as well. Another cause is very often a cheap filter. So the lesson is to keep your glass clean and remove filters to eliminate most of the problems. But sometimes, rather than circles, you might get an arbitrary streak of light. The most undesirable outcome is when the flare makes the entire image look like it's out of focus or foggy, when you actually had focus and there was no fog. This is most often caused when light is raking across the lens from the side and can mostly be avoided through the use of a lens hood, which I went over in episode 89. What if your lens is completely clean and you're shooting without a filter, but you're still having problems? Unfortunately, most people with this complaint are shooting directly into the light source, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. Or perhaps you might file a complaint with your neighborhood glass engineer. But what about the use of a polarization filter? I spoke both with a physicist and a glass engineer for the answer to this question. Without actually testing anything in real life, they both felt that a polarizing filter would not likely do much to increase or decrease lens flare. There are several reasons for this. It all depends on the angle of the light, where the light is coming from, and also the design of the filter itself. They believe that most of the flare is happening further in the lens, while a polarizing filter is sitting at the very front of the lens. So you'll have to try and see what happens. If you want more lens flare, close down your aperture. If you want less, open up your aperture. Change your angle to intensify or diminish the effects of lens flare. Use a hood and stop shooting towards or directly into the light source if you want to avoid it altogether. That's it for today. I hope that was helpful. Until next time, keep on shooting.